I mean, just picture this for a second. You are trying to put a deeply exhausted, and let's be honest, probably somewhat cranky 5-year-old to sleep.
Oh yeah, the classic bedtime struggle.
Right. Like, you've done the bath, you force them to brush their teeth, you dim the lights in the bedroom, you tuck them in, and you hit play on a bedtime story.
The holy grail of the nighttime routine.
Exactly. You are just praying for immediate calm. And the very first thing the narrator yells, literally at the top of her lungs, is, "Do you love bears? Tell me in the comments. Follow our channel and press like."
Wow. Yeah, that sounds intense.
It sounds like an absolute nightmare scenario for a parent. I mean, it feels like throwing a flashbang into a sensory deprivation tank.
That is a great way to put it.
But today we are actually doing a deep dive into this tiny piece of audio that proves this exact jarring setup might actually be a stroke of psychological genius.
It really does seem completely counterintuitive at first glance, I have to admit. Because, we have this deep-seated cultural idea of what a bedtime story is supposed to be.
Right, like hushed tones, whispering.
Exactly. Soft voices, slow pacing, this immediate downregulation of the nervous system. So when you introduce the hyperkinetic language of modern internet culture into that sacred space, it just feels wrong.
It feels like a mistake.
But if you look at the actual cognitive state of a child at, say, 8:00 p.m. in the modern world, that high-energy introduction is doing some very heavy lifting.
And that is exactly what we are getting into today, because the source material we're looking at is an episode of a children's audio series called Grandpa and Lily, Kids' Bedtime English Stories.
Yeah.
The specific episode is titled The Bear Who Couldn't Sleep. And just to set the baseline for you listening out there, it's aimed at kids aged 4 to 10. It's categorized as very simple English, and the runtime is barely 5 minutes long.
Which is, 5 minutes is practically nothing in the grand scheme of media consumption.
Right.
Most people spend more time just scrolling through their feeds trying to pick something to listen to.
Yeah, exactly. And on the surface, it's just this super basic story about a bear who hears a noise. But when I actually sat down and listened to it and, read through the accompanying text and all the translations, I realized this 5-minute clip is engineered with a level of precision that is kind of terrifying.
It really is operating on so many different frequencies at once.
It is. We've got modern digital engagement tactics colliding with these ancient storytelling archetypes. We've got highly specific sensory countdowns designed to literally alter a child's heart rate.
And we can't forget the linguistic engine hiding underneath all of that.
Oh, man, yeah. A full-blown system designed to teach a second language without the listener even realizing it.
The architecture of it is just fascinating. To really grasp how it manipulates the listener's brain state, you have to look at the framing device they chose. The creators didn't just hire a single narrator.
Right, they used two.
Yeah, they built a framed narrative using two highly contrasting voices. You have Grandpa, whose vocal profile is explicitly described in the text as slow, deep, and warm.
The classic elder archetype, right?
Precisely. And acting as the foil to him, you have his granddaughter, Lily.
And Lily is the one who comes out swinging. The text notes that her delivery is excited and bouncy. She opens the track by shouting, "Hello, hello, hello, friends. It is Lily again with my grandpa. Tonight's story is about a bear.
She's at a 10 right out of the gate.
A big brown bear who cannot sleep. I love bears so much."
And that energy spike is entirely deliberate.
But why? I genuinely just don't get it. If my goal is to get a kid to sleep, why am I subjecting them to a hype man?
Well,
And it's not just the tone, right? It's the specific vocabulary she uses right after that intro. She pivots straight into what sounds like a YouTube end screen script.
yes, the call to action.
She asks the listener, "Do you love bears? Tell me in the comments." And then tells them to follow our channel and press. Is this just the modern kids' version of stalling for time? Like the classic, "Can I have a glass of water?" routine, but just updated for the iPad era?
Oh, I see. No, it's actually much more functional than stalling. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the target demographic here. We're talking about kids ages 4 to 10.
Right.
These are digital natives. The traditional fourth wall, that invisible, understood barrier between the performer on a stage and the audience in the seats, that doesn't really exist for them in the context of digital media.
Okay, wait. For those of us who aren't psychology majors, we're talking about parasocial relationships here, right? Like the child actually believes Lily is talking directly to them, almost like they're on a FaceTime call.
Yes. A parasocial relationship is essentially a one-sided bond where a media consumer feels a genuine sense of friendship or intimacy with the media persona.
Even though Lily has no idea who the kid is.
Right. For a modern 5-year-old, a broadcast isn't a passive experience where they just sit back and absorb. It's a two-way street. They fully expect the host to look into the camera, or in this case, speak directly into the microphone and ask for their opinion.
Tell me in the comments.
Exactly. So to them, asking for a like isn't some annoying commercial interruption.
It's just the native syntax of a greeting.
It is the only language they inherently trust. And from a neurological standpoint, this is absolutely crucial for the bedtime transition.
How so?
Think about the end of the day. A young child's attention is incredibly fractured. They're often overtired, their cortisol levels might be spiking because they are actively fighting the biological urge to sleep.
Oh, yeah, fighting sleep is a full contact sport for a toddler.
Right, so their brains are bouncing from one thought to the next. If you started recording right then with a slow, monotone, deep voice, what happens?
They just tune it out completely. It becomes background noise and they start playing with their blankets or asking for a snack.
Exactly. The slow voice doesn't have the requisite energy to hook their fractured attention.
Ah, I get it now.
Lily's high-energy, hyper-engaged intro operates on the exact same frequency as the child's chaotic brain state. She matches their energy level.
That's brilliant.
She grabs them by speaking a language they're hardwired to respond to the language of the interactive digital creator. She secures the engagement. And then, and this is the mechanical genius of the track, she hands the reins over to Grandpa.
Oh, wow. So she is the hook and he is the anchor.
Precisely.
She gathers up all that chaotic, bouncing energy in the room, says, look over here, and then just passes that focused attention to the slow, deep voice that can actually begin the work of downregulating the nervous system.
It's basically an auditory bait and switch. And the creators of this audio track are doing something even more clever.
Yeah.
Because this dynamic at the meta level perfectly mirrors the actual plot of the story they are about to tell.
Wait, really?
Think about it. You have a high-energy, distracted element colliding with a slow, exhausted element.
Oh, right. The listener is energetic and distracted, and the protagonist of the story is deeply exhausted but kept awake by a tiny distraction. It's mirroring. Okay, so let's get into the actual story. Because Grandpa takes over from Lily, and the pacing just drops immediately. He establishes the setting, a big, beautiful forest, tall trees, soft green grass, very standard fairy tale stuff. And then he introduces Bruno.
A big brown bear.
But Grandpa doesn't just describe what Bruno looks like. He immediately gives us Bruno's entire personality profile in like 3 quick beats.
Right.
He says Bruno was a very good bear who was kind to everyone. He helps rabbits carry their things. He helps birds build their nests. And he shares his berries with anyone who is hungry.
And you really have to notice how deliberate it is that they chose a brown bear for this specific set of behaviors.
What do you mean?
Well, authors of children's literature rely heavily on established animal archetypes, right? Foxes are clever, owls are wise, wolves are dangerous.
Sure.
A brown bear in the real world is a massive apex predator. It is an animal characterized by immense physical power, territorial aggression, and danger. But in this narrative, that immense power is entirely subjugated.
So they took a literal grizzly bear and basically made him a mall greeter.
Yeah.
Like he's carrying luggage for rabbits. In a realistic forest ecosystem, those rabbits would be terrified of him. Why flip that dynamic so extremely?
Because subverting the predator dynamic is a highly efficient way to establish the archetype of the gentle giant.
Okay, go on.
When you take the most physically powerful entity in a given environment and strip away its capacity for violence, replacing it entirely with altruism, you create the ultimate safe harbor.
Oh, I see.
The child listening understands intuitively that Bruno is strong enough to protect them from absolutely anything, but gentle enough that he will never ever hurt them. His physical size becomes a direct metaphor for his capacity for care.
He is the foundational pillar of his community. He doesn't just live in the forest. He is personally responsible for its upkeep.
Exactly.
But, this is where I start to get a little skeptical of the narrative. Because everyone in the forest loves Bruno. He is constantly helping. He is the ultimate nice guy. Yet Grandpa reveals that Bruno has a massive problem. He can't sleep. Lily actually chimes in and asks if he isn't tired, and Grandpa says, oh, he was very tired. So tired.
Yes, the core conflict.
Wait, if he's that physically exhausted from carrying rabbit luggage all day, why doesn't he just roll over and go to sleep like a normal bear? I mean, are we reading too much into a cartoon bear here, or is his insomnia actually a symptom of his lifestyle?
I don't think you're reading too much into it at all.
Really? because I couldn't help but wonder if his inability to sleep is a direct byproduct of this hyper-empathy.
You are hitting on the central psychological tension of the caretaker archetype here. Caretaker burnout is a very real, documented phenomenon.
Okay, tell me about that.
When an individual's entire identity is constructed around servicing the needs of others, being the helper, the fixer, the reliable one, they often completely lose the internal mechanism required to just switch off.
Because their brain is always waiting for the next request.
Exactly. The human brain, and in this case the anthropomorphized bear brain, has a threat detection system. Part of that is the reticular activating system, or RAS, which filters incoming stimuli and decides what is important enough to bring to your conscious attention.
So it filters out background noise but alerts you to danger.
Right. And for Bruno, his RAS is calibrated to detect vulnerability in his environment. It is constantly scanning for birds needing nests or rabbits needing help. Even though his physical body is exhausted, his neurological radar is stuck in the on position.
It's the burden of the reliable friend. You are so used to carrying the weight of everyone else's problems that when you finally lie down in your own bed, your brain is still bracing for the next emergency text message.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And if your identity is tied to solving problems, a quiet environment doesn't actually feel peaceful.
No.
No, it feels like you are missing something, which is exactly why Bruno is so susceptible to what happens next. The text tells us that every time Bruno put his big furry head down and closed his eyes, he heard a sound from far away in the forest. Drip, drip, drip.
Which ruins his sleep entirely. Bruno decides he can't ignore it. He has to find the source of the sound.
Because he's a fixer.
Exactly. The text says he put on his big brown paws and he walked into the dark forest to find the sound. And I want to pause on this sequence because this is where the audio track stops being just a story and turns into a highly functional tool.
Oh, absolutely.
Grandpa describes Bruno walking through the dark forest, and he is being guided by this drip, drip, drip. As he walks, he passes 4 very specific landmarks. He passes a tall oak tree, then a little silver river, then a big berry bush, and finally an old stone wall.
And this is not just a random assortment of forest scenery.
Yeah.
What you were observing here is a targeted clinical mechanism for downregulating the listener's nervous system.
It felt exactly like a guided meditation, specifically a mindful walking meditation. You know when you use one of those sleep apps and they tell you to picture yourself walking down a staircase and with every step you get heavier?
Yeah.
This felt like Grandpa was walking the child down a set of cognitive stairs.
The staircase analogy is spot on. Let's break down the mechanics of why it works so well. First, you have the auditory metronome, the drip, drip.
Right.
This rhythmic repetition mimics a resting heartbeat. When a child focuses on a slow, predictable, rhythmic sound, their own biological rhythms, their heart rate and their breathing will naturally begin to synchronize with it.
Wow, really?
Yes, it's a biological phenomenon called entrainment.
So the drip is literally slowing down their physical heart rate. That is wild. But what about the landmarks? The tree, the river, the bush, the wall? Why those specific things?
Look at the progression of the imagery. It is actively narrowing the listener's spatial awareness.
How so?
Well, they start with the tall oak tree. An oak tree implies massive scale, verticality, reaching up into the sky. It's a very expansive image.
Right, that makes you look up and out.
Then they move to the little silver river. A river introduces the concept of continuous flow, of things moving away from you and out of your control. It's lateral movement.
Okay, so from up to across.
Then the big berry bush. A bush is lower to the ground. It represents immediate sustenance, physical grounding, the tactile reality of the forest floor.
So we've gone from the sky to the flowing water to the ground right in front of us. The lens is literally zooming in.
And then finally, he arrives at the old stone wall.
Which completely halts the momentum. A stone wall doesn't grow like a tree, it doesn't flow like a river, and it doesn't offer food like a bush. It's just there. It's a dead end.
Precisely. In the context of nature imagery, an old stone wall is an unnatural boundary. It represents the absolute edge of the known environment. It is solid, unmoving, cold, and finite.
It's a wall in every sense of the word.
By walking the listener past the expansive tree, the flowing river, and the vibrant bush, only to arrive at a cold, hard stone wall, the narrative acts as a cognitive countdown.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
It is systematically stripping away the sprawling, interconnected distractions of the forest and forcing the brain to focus on a single, isolated, immovable point. It is a technique heavily used in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI.
You have to shrink the world down to quiet the mind.
Exactly.
But there is also something incredibly relatable about the premise of this journey. You have this massive, powerful bear navigating this giant forest, and he is being drawn out of his bed by this microscopic sound.
It's very human.
It is. Have you ever tried to sleep and your house is perfectly quiet, but there's just one tiny noise, a ticking clock in the hallway, or a faucet dripping in the bathroom, or a neighbor's TV buzzing through the wall?
Oh, all the time.
And because it's the only sensory input available, your brain just magnifies it until it feels like it's echoing inside your skull.
It highlights a universal neurological truth about how the brain powers down. When the brain transitions from active beta waves to the slower alpha and theta waves of early sleep, the default mode network, which is the part of the brain responsible for wandering thoughts and environmental scanning, tries to find something to latch onto.
Like it's desperate for a job.
Yeah, exactly. If there is an unresolved anomaly in the environment, no matter how small it is, the brain will fixate on it as a potential threat or a puzzle to be solved.
Because an unresolved puzzle means the environment isn't safe yet.
Right. The drip, drip, drip is an anomaly. Bruno's brain, which we've already established is wired to care for his environment, simply cannot ignore an unresolved signal.
He can't just let it go.
He cannot simply roll over and go to sleep because his internal logic dictates that a noise means something requires his attention. The physical journey to find the source, the mindful walking past the landmarks, is the only way he can quiet his mind.
He has to externalize his internal restlessness.
He has to solve the puzzle.
Which brings us to the actual reveal. Because the puzzle is solved, but it completely derails the soothing, sleep-inducing countdown we were just on.
It pivots sharply.
It really does. Bruno crosses the old stone wall, and the source of the sound flips all of our expectations. Lily interrupts Grandpa to ask what was making the sound, and Grandpa drops the bomb. It wasn't water dripping from a branch.
No.
It was a tiny mouse, sitting all alone under a small, broken house, crying. The drip, drip, drip was the sound of her tears falling on the leaves.
It is a devastatingly poignant image, especially in the middle of a narrative designed to put a child to sleep. It shifts the entire emotional register of the story in an instant.
We pivot from a sensory mystery, like what is making that dripping sound, into a profound emotional crisis.
Yes.
And the sheer physical disparity between the two characters in this moment is staggering. You have Bruno, the apex predator, the giant of the forest, and you have a tiny mouse. The text makes sure to note her misery.
She's in a bad spot.
She is wet, she's cold, and she tells Bruno, I don't know what to do. But what really fascinated me here was how Bruno reacts to finding her.
How so?
Well, if I am a hyper-empathetic caretaker who finally found the source of the problem, my instinct would be to rush in, pick her up, and fix it immediately.
Right. Take control of the situation.
Exactly. But Bruno doesn't do that. The text explicitly states, Bruno sat down very slowly because he was a very big bear and he did not want to scare her. And then when he speaks, he uses his softest voice.
This is a masterclass in modeling emotional intelligence for young listeners. Bruno recognizes the power dynamic immediately. He understands that his mere presence, his massive physical scale, could easily exacerbate the mouse's trauma if he isn't careful.
Can we break that down a bit? Because I think this is a crucial point. How does a 5-minute children's story use this contrast in physical size to teach a kid about consent and emotional care without sounding like, a preachy after-school special?
It works because it roots a highly abstract concept, empathy, in a concrete physical action.
Okay, elaborate on that.
For a young child, abstract concepts like power dynamics or emotional boundaries are invisible and therefore essentially incomprehensible. But physical size, big versus small, that is a dynamic a 5-year-old understands intimately.
Because they spend their entire lives looking up at adults who control their environment.
Precisely. Empathy is often mistakenly taught as simply feeling sorry for someone. But true empathy, mature empathy, is recognizing how the vulnerable party perceives you and adjusting your behavior to create safety for them.
Oh.
Bruno is demonstrating that you cannot effectively help someone if your method of helping terrifies them.
You cannot help someone if your method of helping terrifies them. That is profound. By sitting down slowly, he is actively shrinking his physical footprint to make space for her vulnerability.
Yes.
He lowers his physical center of gravity to match her emotional low point.
He modifies his body language and he modifies his vocal tone. He essentially asks for permission to enter her space before he attempts to solve her problem.
So he asks her why she is crying. She explains the situation. Her house has a hole in the roof, it's raining heavily, and she is freezing. And then the story gives us this incredibly specific, slightly weird physical detail.
About the roof.
Bruno looks at the tiny house, he looks at the hole in the roof, and the text says it was about the size of Bruno's paw.
That is not a weird detail at all. It is the linchpin of the entire narrative metaphor. Let's look at the mouse's situation. She is experiencing a crisis of scale.
A crisis of scale.
The elements, the rain, the broken roof, the cold, are massively out of her control. She is overwhelmed by the sheer size of the world working against her.
Right.
And then you have Bruno's paw.
Right.
His paw being the exact size of the hole illustrates a beautiful concept about community and diversity.
You know, it reminds me of when you have a specific, incredibly niche skill at work that you always thought was kind of useless, but then one day a massive crisis hits the project, and it turns out your weird little skill is the exact puzzle piece needed to save the entire company.
That is a very grounded, practical way to look at it. Bruno's massive size is usually a trait associated with taking up space, with dominance, or even clumsiness in a fragile environment.
Like a bull in a china shop.
Exactly. But in this specific instance, the trait that makes him different from the mouse is the exact tool required to save her. It teaches the listener that we often possess exactly what is needed to fill a specific void in someone else's life, precisely because we are vastly different from them.
I love that. So having diagnosed the problem and realized he possesses the cure, Bruno takes an action that defies logic and personal comfort. It leads us straight into the emotional climax of the story.
The resolution.
Bruno sits down next to the little house, very carefully, and he puts his big warm paw directly over the hole in the roof. Lily, who is our hyper-energetic proxy for the listener, reacts to this with pure astonishment. He covered the hole with his paw, she says.
And the immediate physical environment changes. The rain stops coming into the house. The crisis is halted.
But the mouse, recognizing the massive inconvenience this is causing the bear, actually points out the absurdity of the situation. She looks up at him with big eyes and says, "You don't have to do that. You are so big and I am so small."
Which is such an interesting moment.
It is. She is giving him an out. She is acknowledging the extreme disparity in their social standing within the forest ecosystem. She's essentially saying, I am a tiny, insignificant mouse. You are the giant bear who runs this place. You should not be inconveniencing yourself, getting soaked in the cold rain, just for me.
And Bruno's response.
It's just 4 simple words, but they hit incredibly hard. He looks at her and says, I know, but I want to.
But I want to. If we are analyzing the altruistic archetype, those 4 words are the absolute bedrock.
How so?
His action is not driven by obligation. It isn't driven by instinct. And it certainly isn't driven by a desire for recognition or reward, because he's in the middle of a dark forest where no one else can see him.
There's no audience.
It is driven purely by volition, by the active desire to alleviate suffering simply because the suffering exists and he has the capacity to stop it.
But let's look at the physical reality of what he's actually doing here. The text says, so there they sat, all through the long rainy night, the tiny mouse inside her dry little house, and Big Bruno outside with his paw over the hole.
He is sacrificing his own comfort.
Massively, he is sitting outside, in the cold rain, all night long. He is wet, he is freezing, and his arm is probably cramping. But the consequence of this physical sacrifice yields an immediate emotional reward. The little mouse stops crying, she feels warm, and she falls fast asleep.
And this is the moment where Grandpa delivers the core moral thesis of the entire narrative.
Listen.
As the mouse falls asleep, Grandpa explains Bruno's internal state. Despite being out in the freezing rain, Bruno discovers something wonderful. Grandpa tells the listener, when you help someone else feel warm and safe, you feel warm and safe too.
That is the paradox of caregiving right there. The concept of physical discomfort resulting in emotional peace.
It's a very real phenomenon.
It made me think immediately of those early days of parenting. You know, when you are holding a sleeping baby and you end up trapped in a wildly uncomfortable position?
Oh, absolutely. The classic trap.
Your arm goes completely numb, your back aches, your neck is bent at an angle that guarantees you will need a chiropractor. But you don't dare move a single muscle.
Not an inch.
Because internally, despite the acute physical pain, you are experiencing profound peace. The physical safety of that child translates directly into your own neurochemical sense of well-being.
That is a perfect biological analogy. When we engage in acts of deep, altruistic caretaking, our brains release a cascade of neurochemicals.
Like what?
Specifically oxytocin, which is often called the bonding hormone, and dopamine. These chemicals act as powerful stress reducers and even physical painkillers. The warm feeling Grandpa describes isn't just a poetic metaphor. It is a literal neurochemical shift occurring in Bruno's brain.
Wow.
And if we connect this back to Bruno's original problem, it completely recontextualizes his insomnia.
Right. Because he's been awake this whole time.
We initially discussed his insomnia as caretaker burnout. But looking at the resolution, we realize his insomnia wasn't a biological failure of his sleep cycle, it was a spiritual restlessness.
A spiritual restlessness. Can you expand on what that means in this context?
It means that his inability to sleep wasn't about his body, it was about his environment. He couldn't sleep because his highly attuned, empathetic radar sensed that the world around him wasn't at equilibrium. As long as there was unresolved suffering within his sphere of influence, the drip, drip, drip of the mouse's tears, his internal systems simply refused to power down.
Because his job wasn't done yet.
By sacrificing his own immediate physical comfort to bring equilibrium to the mouse's world, he successfully balances his own internal state. The external act of protecting her provides the internal closure his brain needed to finally rest.
And the text confirms this immediately. For the first time in many nights, Bruno closes his eyes and sleeps. Right there in the rain, leaning against a stone wall, with his big paw over a hole and a tiny smile on his face.
It's a beautiful image.
It is. Grandpa then delivers the final soothing thought to Lily and to the listener. He says, kindness always comes back to you, like a warm blanket on a cold night. It's this beautiful reciprocal force. It warms the giver exactly as much as it warms the receiver.
It provides a profoundly comforting resolution. Lily, who started the track screaming about YouTube likes, whispers very softly that she wants to be like Bruno.
The energy has totally shifted.
Grandpa reassures her that she already is, and the audio successfully lulls her and presumably the child listening to sleep. The narrative arc is flawlessly executed.
And start to finish.
The hyper-energetic digital native has been hooked, gently guided down the cognitive stairs of the dark forest, witnessed a radical act of empathy, and has been safely tucked into a stay of rest. The bedtime story has done its job.
But we're not done.
We are not.
Because just as Grandpa lulls Lily to sleep, the source material throws a massive curveball. If you actually look at the transcript of this audio track, there is an addendum at the very end, a section titled Simple Words in this Story.
The hidden architecture.
Exactly. It provides a list of English words from the story, paired with their direct translations into Bengali. The words are gentle, which is translated to Murdu or Komal, kindness, translated to Doya, discover, translated to Abishkar Kora, furry, translated to Lomosh, paw, translated to Poshrathaba, and warmth, translated to Ushnota.
The inclusion of this vocabulary list fundamentally alters how we must view this text. It reveals that the entire 5-minute audio track is a dual-purpose tool.
It really is.
It is not solely an entertainment piece or a soothing bedtime ritual. Categorized explicitly as very simple English, it serves as a cross-cultural English, as a second language, or ESL educational tool.
When I saw that list, I actually laughed out loud because it is so incredibly sneaky. It's a Trojan horse. You think you're just putting your kid to sleep, but you're actually running a highly sophisticated bilingual pedagogy program on their subconscious.
It's very stealthy.
But what I want to ask you about is the specific curation of these 6 words. Because if I were writing a simple ESL quiz about a bear in a forest, I would pick words like tree, river, rain, or mouse. But they didn't pick those.
No, they didn't. They bypassed the environmental nouns entirely. If you look closely at the curation, these 6 words, gentle, kindness, discover, furry, paw, warmth, they serve a very specific function.
Which is?
They are the emotional and physical pillars of the story's central moral.
Yes. And that's what makes this so effective. Think about how we traditionally teach language. If I am a teacher and I hold up a blank white flashcard with the abstract English word warmth written on it, and I tell a Bengali-speaking student that it means Ushnota, what does that actually accomplish?
Not much, cognitively speaking.
It's just rote memorization. There is zero emotional anchor. The brain has to work incredibly hard to retain it because it has no context. But if I connect that vocabulary word to the deeply moving narrative image we just discussed, a giant bear choosing to sit in the freezing rain all night to act as a living roof for a tiny crying mouse so that she can feel safe.
It changes everything.
How does hearing a story make Ushnota stick in the brain better than a flashcard?
It all comes down to how the brain processes memory and emotion. What you are describing is the core principle of narrative-based language acquisition, specifically tapping into something called dual coding theory.
Dual coder?
Yes. When you just use a flashcard, you are only engaging the analytical language processing centers of the brain. But when vocabulary is embedded within a high-emotion narrative context, the amygdala, which is the brain's emotional center, lights up.
Okay, the emotion center.
The amygdala constantly communicates with the hippocampus, which is the brain's memory center. When the amygdala tells the hippocampus, hey, we are feeling a strong emotion right now, the hippocampus flags the associated information as vital for long-term storage.
So because the child is feeling empathy for the mouse, the brain treats the vocabulary words as crucial survival information.
Exactly. The retention rate skyrockets. And look at how the pedagogical design structures this specific list. It pairs sensory, tactile imagery with highly abstract moral concepts.
Break that down for me.
You have the physical words: furry, lomosh, paw, pushur thaba. These words ground the learner in the physical reality of the bear. Because of the descriptive buildup in the story, the listener can almost feel the texture of the wet fur. They can visualize the massive size of the paw covering the hole.
The brain creates a sensory map.
Right. And then, once the physical map is built, the list introduces the abstract concepts: gentle, ridu or komal, and kindness, doya.
Which are notoriously difficult concepts to teach through direct translation.
Because they require a higher level of cognitive processing? What does gentle actually look like? Well, because the learner has just spent 3 minutes visualizing Bruno actively modifying his massive body language, sitting down slowly, speaking softly to accommodate a terrified mouse. The abstract concept of gentle is permanently tethered to a concrete visual memory.
They don't just know the definition. They know what the definition feels like in practice.
Exactly.
And then the list finishes with discover, Abishkar Kora, and warmth, Wishnoda, the revelation and the reward.
It is brilliant sequencing. By weaving these specific words into a narrative of intense emotional resonance, the pedagogy allows a child, whether they are a native English speaker expanding their vocabulary, or a Bengali speaker learning English, to bypass the analytical friction of learning a new language.
The language embeds itself directly into the emotional center.
It is an incredibly sophisticated architectural design hidden inside what looks like a disposable 5-minute audio clip.
It really is. Okay, let's take a step back and look at the incredible density of what we've just explored today. We started with a piece of audio that appeared to be the most rudimentary thing in the world. A 5-minute bedtime story about a tired bear.
The simplest premise imaginable.
But by actually examining the mechanics of the text, we found a narrative framed by jarring modern YouTube engagement requests that somehow seamlessly unfolded into a masterclass on emotional intelligence.
We really went deep.
We explored the archetype of the gentle giant and the psychological burden of hyper-empathy and caretaker burnout. We dissected a mindful sensory countdown specifically designed to downregulate a child's heart rate and induce sleep.
The cognitive staircase.
We witnessed a profound lesson on physical restraint, power dynamics, and the true meaning of empathy. We discovered that the cure for spiritual insomnia is a radical act of selfless reciprocity. And finally, we revealed a hidden, sophisticated, bilingual pedagogical tool designed to sear complex vocabulary into the emotional memory of cross-cultural learners.
It is a profound reminder that we shouldn't dismiss media simply because it is aimed at children or because it is brief. Even the simplest narratives, when crafted with intention and an understanding of human psychology, contain depths that reflect our most complex emotional and educational needs.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to connect this back to you listening right now, because much like Bruno, we all occasionally struggle to quiet our minds at the end of a long day.
We all have our own version of that distant drip, drip, drip.
Exactly. Keeping us awake, our own unresolved puzzles, our own spiritual restlessness. Lily ends the broadcast with a soft, sweet sign-off. She whispers, "Be kind today. It will come back to you, I promise." And so I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over on your own tonight.
What is it?
Well, if Bruno's chronic insomnia was instantly cured by an act of selfless physical discomfort, literally sitting in the cold rain to protect someone smaller and more vulnerable than himself, what does that tell us about our own modern quests for comfort and peace of mind?
That's a great question.
We buy weighted blankets, we download white noise apps, we install blackout curtains, all in a desperate attempt to force our brains into a state of rest. But could our own late-night restlessness simply be a subconscious signal? A signal that somewhere nearby someone just needs our paw over their root?